Hi, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Bobby Taff, and I'm the Executive Director of Movies in the Park Jamaica. Movies in the Park Jamaica is a social enterprise that I formed a couple years ago that promotes Caribbean arts and culture. One of our extension programs are Artist Talks, which provides an opportunity for artists to talk about issues and or topics related to the film. We sometimes delve into a role of advocacy, dealing with issues that affect either a global or local communities, either Caribbean or non-Caribbean. Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Peart about domestic violence as it pertains to the issues that are currently happening in the Caribbean, in the country of Jamaica, and the role that she plays in addressing those issues. And Dr. Peart, I'd like to give you an opportunity for you to introduce yourself.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, Mr. So, as said, my name is Dr. Tamika Pierce. I am a social development consultant. I have been working in the area of gender and development for quite some time. Even before so, after leaving university in 2012, that was really the space I was working in, alternative conflict resolution. And a part of the area that I really worked on as a coordinator / mediator was domestic violence cases and child abuse matters. So it has informed what I've done since then. I consider myself to be a feminist, and that whole outlook on, justice and fairness, it has really steered me and on a path that I would like to go in my future career and current future career and personal development. So that's more or less what it is.
Okay. So what are some of the issues that are taking place in Jamaica right now in regards to domestic violence? Maybe you can talk a little bit about nationally what's happening and how that's being addressed.
All right, so some of the issues that are happening in terms of domestic violence nationally in Jamaica. Well, let me just say, the point of reference for us in terms of data at a national level would be the Women's Health Survey that was done in 2016 in Jamaica. And it's the first such national level data that we have as a country to really give us a prevalence report on what is happening where domestic violence, not just domestic violence, but gender-based violence on a whole is happening in Jamaica. And what we do note from that is that it is very commonplace. Let's say 1 in every 4 Jamaican women, based on what the data is saying, are victims of intimate partner violence. 1 in every 3 Jamaican women would have been sexually touched in an inappropriate way. And then it even looks at the whole life cycle of domestic violence in Jamaica. It's not just something that happens when you're 16 and then it ends when you're 30. What the data is telling us is that domestic violence is a life cycle for women in Jamaica. And one of the emerging problems we're seeing too is that from the data, we do know that the women, they're not accessing the social services. So it is there. A lot of sensitization is happening, but there seems to be a disconnect with what exists and how persons feel that they should access these services. Again, because of the life cycle state of domestic violence in Jamaica, we are seeing where at some point you have mothers and daughters who are simultaneously victims and survivors of domestic violence. We are also seeing what the data has always been telling us as persons who work in the space, that a lot of the times we think that the persons who offend women and girls, they are, this stranger who rides out of nowhere and rapes or molests. It's actually by persons we know. So again, outside of the Women's Health Survey, there are other reports that frames the issues. Let's say we do know that children who are born in households that have single parents, single mothers, they're at an enhanced vulnerability to experience certain types of abuse. We do know that gender-based violence, domestic violence, it takes a particular form on school campuses across Jamaica. So we are talking about even school-based gender-based violence in Jamaica. And again, the culture and the socialization, you know, it enables these kinds of things that happen with our young girls at schools. We're looking at things like sexual grooming. These are things that are still commonplace that we have to work on as a society. We are also looking at the issue of how sexual harassment is commonplace in Jamaican society. You know, again, the data is telling us that 25% of Jamaican women have been harassed at some point. And again, the data is still, there is still the possibility that it's a lot more prevalent than what the data is telling us. Again, two quite unrelated, but also related, is the data that comes from the Child, Family and Protective Services Agency that do share a snapshot in what the problem is at the moment. Child abuse in Jamaica is also serious. And when you talk about child abuse and you venture into carnal abuse, having sex with young girls, that is also a very serious problem. And some persons would go the mile to say that it is the tip of the iceberg, even though the data is telling us that it is pretty prevalent. It means that a lot of the times it goes unreported. So at a national level, we have challenges with knowing the prevalence of what is happening.
Okay, so how are you addressing that? So I've identified the fact that, you know, you are in crisis, this is occurring. What is it that you're doing, and how are you engaging other members of the community in order to find solutions to address these problems?
All right, so in terms of my work as a development person, I take a grassroots approach to these things. So yes, I work as a development consultant, and I have been doing so, but outside of that, I have also been an activist. So through projects and programs, I've been out there providing sensitization to persons to help them to understand that, you know, domestic violence is not a private matter. Domestic violence is actually a public matter. And I try to provide sensitizations to key public. So I speak with, let's say, single mothers, I speak with rural women, I speak with high school young women. And outside of that too, whenever I get speaking engagements, I try to reschedule my activities around that, because I never take it for granted that there's somebody out there that needs information that I have to provide to them. And then in my personal life too, I'm on social media, persons reach out to me telling me that, you know, that this is something that is happening and we would like for you to provide some form of assistance. And with knowledge of what I have in terms of what is happening at a national level, where are the key ministries, departments and agencies, I, through my own personal agency, have been working with persons to get help for critical, key persons who have reached out to me. Outside of that, I also sit on the Gender Advisory Council of Jamaica, and the activist work that I do on the ground, it informs how I prepare myself for policy work. And at that level, the Gender Advisory Council provides a framework for how gender-based violence will be eliminated in Jamaica. And I work particularly on the technical working group that concerns the protection of data concerning GBV in Jamaica, and also youth engagement on the area. So, and again, also in my professional life, I lecture, and the courses that I lecture, they do fall in social development. I lecture sociology. That's a course that I do every semester. And through my own personal agency, I ensure that by the time the semester ends, the students would have been aware that gender-based violence is a problem. Students would have been aware that gender in of itself is a cross-cutting tool, and everything in my discussion as a lecturer goes back to gender as being something that impacts everything that we do in society. I would like to think that the connections that I formed on an international scale, the connections that I form on a national scale, that I've used them effectively to help women and to help young girls across Jamaica.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to touch on two things. I wanted to talk about the work that you do as an educator, Dr. Peart, and then I also wanted to touch on
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I wanted to touch on the work that you're doing as an educator. So if you could just expand on that a little bit, and then we'll circle around and talk about the policy work that's currently taking place in the country.
Okay, so all right, I said as an educator, I do social development courses, and recent graduate, I graduated in 2019.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And since then, I've always had to lecture sociology, but outside of sociology, I do project management for social development, and I also do human sexual behavior, and I also do management of social services. The likely students who would have been a part of these courses outside of sociology are always students who are likely to go into social work or courses within that social space. So I work with my students to help them to excel in stakeholder engagement. I work with them to help them to understand project management in terms of crafting project proposals and implementing projects, monitoring and evaluation, because responding to domestic violence, that is where we are right now. We have to have a lot of synergy between what the government is doing and what civil society is doing. So through my work as an educator, I prepare my students to have the option to really do work in public service or to go into civil society by way of being employed by one of the NGOs in the country. I also create a lot of opportunities for industry players to come in and talk to my students. I always say to my students when they come at the beginning of the semester with me, listen, I am a academic. I am not the regular academic, because I believe that we are in a space that concerns social issues. And as much as academia is about theory building, we must be able to connect these theories with real life situations. We must be able to bridge the gap between the theory and the lived experiences of these vulnerable groups that we are working with. So through my experience as an educator, I can tell you my students, from time to time, they say, Dr. Peart, some of the times we think you're too liberal with certain things, because I explain to them that the vulnerable groups in society, outside of just being vulnerable in terms of not getting the attention that they should get, by virtue of being on the periphery of development, they have their own issues. Enhanced risk of becoming a victim of domestic violence is one, whether it is same-sex relationships or heterosexual relationships. And I'm always big on this idea of tolerance and the fact that you work in social space, but it means that you are thinking about yourself within a global context, within a global reality. So a big part of the hidden curriculum for my courses is that the world is becoming more tolerant. And it's interesting that I'm saying it now when the world just the other day seemed to becoming more not so tolerant. But I always say to them that there's a world bigger than Jamaica, and a lot of the issues that are in Jamaica, they are in the world at large. And if you can respond to these issues in Jamaica, it prepares you for the global realities that you would have left Jamaica to live in.
Okay. And so do you find that there are a lot of other global institutions and or nationally focused institutions in other countries that are now tapping into the educated pool of social service workers that are accessible and trained in globally focused programming to work in their countries or in their communities? And or are you working in partnership with them in any way? Has there been any increase in that type of work, or are the students then, staying and focusing and doing the work locally at home? So
Well,
you've
I do
trained them to
know.
have this global focus and to be able to easily work in other communities and other countries globally. But are they actually having those opportunities to work in other countries and deal with those
Well,
issues
all
and
right.
influence
So
them?
funnily you asked that, Miss Staff, because just yesterday I wrapped up one of for my college. For my college we used yesterday to observe International Women's Day, and interestingly, we had a speaker from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and her focus is human services. She works in that space. We had also an expert from Grenada. We had an expert from Pakistan. We had an expert from Rwanda. So again, as I tell you, I studied abroad, and my linkages that I have maintained over the years by studying abroad, I brought them into my experience as a professional, not just in the academic space, because I've started a discussion with one of my colleagues in Canada to hear if I can set up a university here in Jamaica with a university there to have students, their students abroad, offering counseling under some circumstances to survivors of gender-based violence, and would streamline some procedures in place that students here would also get the opportunity. But in so doing, we realize that there are certain things that we have to streamline. Let's say the whole issue of social workers becoming licensed. So we have a framework like that in Jamaica, but we're not yet at that point where, abroad you can lose your license if you are a social worker. Those are the discussions that we're having at the moment. I am having at the moment, at least through my own agency. But outside of that, universities right now, they are making partnership. Partnership is the way to go, signing memoranda of understanding with other universities. I know that the University of the West Indies is big on partnerships and partnering with other regional institutions, more so because they're already a part of a regional framework. But they're very big on partnership, and it's the same for the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean, and it's the same for Northern Caribbean University. So I will put myself out there on the limb to say that students they're not just being theoretically exposed to this idea of being a global citizen, but they're also given the practical exposure. They're given opportunities to talk to experts who are in the field in another space where you have more resources. So you get an idea of what persons would do in an ideal space, but you also get the opportunity to talk to persons who are from countries that are struggling like yourself, like you. And how is it that they plug this gap in the absence of a structured case management framework?
Okay. So what are they saying then? How are they addressing those issues? How are they finding those solutions, and how are they addressing them? So you had a chance to have a conversation with workers from those various countries. What is their feedback? What are you hearing from them?
Particularly the forum that we had yesterday was addressing female leaders and how they're managing the COVID-19 crisis. They were bringing their perspective. It was tiered within different, it looked at different sides to the gender and COVID-19 management, but it was not looking at that aspect of it. But what I do make note of is that in what I'm doing right now is a discussion with a university abroad to look at how we can have master students providing some kinds of counseling or counseling under some situation with local survivors of GBV. But outside of that, when you talk to, let's say when I talk to my colleagues who are abroad and they're in the space of, let's say, counseling survivors of domestic violence, and they're also students, you know, they're working and they're studying full-time, you get the feeling that there is some level of seriousness on the part of the state with understanding that domestic violence is a public health matter that has to be allocated funding for. You get the idea that there is a deliberate effort on the part of the state to provide assistance to women who are in this situation. You get the understanding that case management is not simply you responding to a case in a haphazard manner. You get the idea that there is really a science in how you approach this. So you learn that students can be exposed to the best case practices, but a lot of how they will apply those best case practices is left to what exists in our framework for treatment of domestic violence. And as I said, it boils down back to the political will of the different countries that we are looking at. So I have friends, let's say in Beijing, when you talk to them about what is happening in Beijing, and you hear about the different life skills that women are exposed to once they come to a survival space or a shelter, you learn about the opportunities that they now have access to. Similarly, when you talk to colleagues in let's say Tanzania, you get the idea that civil society is very active in that space, providing women with opportunities in farming to build their capacity so they can not only provide household food security, at a household level, but they also get the opportunity to provide for themselves and that way reduce the dependency on their partners. So when you explore different countries and what exists out there, you find that the system, it's more moving away from treating this problem as it happens right here, giving the person something. It's more moving towards sustainability.
Okay, and it sounds like are there preventative measures that are discussed at the same time? And have they talked about what preventative measures that they're putting in place and providing or making, drawing awareness around so that women can consider how they will approach, raising their families and leading their households if they have the option of doing so? Is that something that they're currently discussing as opposed to providing these resources and retraining after incidents are occurring within the household?
Okay, all right. So the way forward, there's a consistent trend right now. Let me put it this way. A lot of the countries, they seem to have an action plan to eliminate domestic violence. Not only domestic violence, the whole gamut of gender-based violence. A lot of the countries, they have devised some amount of action plan. It's the same direction that we are going in the Caribbean. It's the same direction that we are in Jamaica right now, where we have a series of plans that we will execute to reduce gender-based violence. For countries like Jamaica, where we are in a developing state, it more concerns linking service providers together and for service providers to have an understanding of what their role is in the treatment and response to gender-based violence. So let's say the Jamaican experience so far, one of a part of the action plan is to have a national shelter that responds to survivors of gender-based violence. There is a national helpline. There is also plans to put in place 2 other state shelters. So I said the direction right now is to link the system and for the system to work for women who are victims and survivors of gender-based violence as a way to prevent it. But outside of treating and responding to it, yes, you will have some behavioral campaigns. Again, when you look at, let's say, Australia, you see them doing no excuse for, well, it's a campaign that is similar to the no excuse for abuse campaign that is happening in Jamaica. So there's also this element of behavioral change, social communication. That is what people are using a lot as a long-term response to preventing gender-based violence. And you also see where there is an effort to create an enabling environment for children in these situations to thrive, to maximize their true potential. So you're looking at, let's say, opportunities for children to get grants where applicable, for children to get school feeding assistance. You are looking at even jobs, special, you have cases where there are actually job banks for women who are in situations like this. So what I do like with the direction now is that it's really multi-pronged. You know, you can't just treat domestic violence by having a one-dimensional response. It has to be a response that focuses on the psychological, the physical, the financial, and the emotional. And that really is the takeaway from what I'm saying, that what we have seen where prevention is concerned is this whole move for us to understand that domestic violence is not just a physical thing. You have more than physical violence as a type of domestic violence. You have financial abuse, you have psychological abuse, and as I said, we are taking a multi-dimensional approach to it.
Okay, so with the current policy work that's being done on a national level by the government, what is actually being done?
I'm not hearing you clearly, I'm sorry.
Okay, I just wanted you to talk, just to pivot back to nationally, what is the work that's being done with policy that's addressing domestic violence issues in the country?
Okay, all right. So the truth is Jamaica has been making a lot of progress in the last few years in terms of treating and responding to domestic violence. There seems like there is a concerted effort to really treat this as a public health problem. Not saying that it is at a perfect state, but you're seeing where there are steps being made to build the gender architecture. So let's say we've never had a case where persons who are victims and survivors of gender-based violence have a helpline to call. It's, it's simple little things like that. And we've always been talking about the private-public partnership that exists between the government of Jamaica and Women Inc., who have been doing an excellent job over the years, but there was a need for more space to accommodate women. And what we have seen is that the government in this, I think 2020, opened a national shelter to treat gender-based violence, domestic violence. What we have seen too is that overall, there seems to be a push to infuse gender equality in the Jamaican society. So we're talking about, let's say, the National Policy for Gender Equality, which provides a roadmap to Jamaica and how we will respond to gender inequality as a societal problem. Gender inequality as something that deters women and vulnerable groups from accessing socially valued goods in Jamaica. We have seen the government, again, moving the scope from just a man beating a woman to other equally serious problems that deter women from having gender equality in its truest sense. So we're looking at the work that is being done on sexual harassment. At this moment, there is a joint select committee that is a joint select committee for the prevention of sexual harassment, and they have been having some really potent discussions about how this bill in its final draft will look. They've been having some real intense presentation from civil society, other ministries, departments, and agencies. And there is a commitment by the government that by the end of this financial year to the beginning of the next financial year, we would have closed up these discussions on sexual harassment to have it in returned back to the host for further discussion. So as I said, no, you get the feeling that the government wants to fix this problem. We can also, I spoke about social and behavioral change communication earlier. There is also the No Excuse for Abuse campaign that the government of Jamaica, through its gender machinery, is currently working on. You know, they go across Jamaica, sensitize key publics that they have identified as groups that they should get some sensitization on gender-based violence. And again, the discussion is not only about gender-based violence. You know, they work with groups, because some of the groups that I would have been with over the years, I would have point them to the group registry that the government has. And that space, the gender machinery for the government of Jamaica, provides a capacity building to them, you know, help them with their governance structure, how to have an effective community group, how to ensure that the projects and programs that you are planning, they are responding to the needs of the community, but not just the community, but responding to the gendered needs of the community. So as I said, I find that there is a willingness on the part of the government. No, again, I go back to the National Policy for Gender Equality. One of the outcome of that right now is one of the big ticket items from the government, and that is the National Strategic Action Plan to Eliminate Gender-Based Violence 2017 to 2027. It is a 10-year action plan, and it tells what are the specific areas that the government will look at to focus on to eliminate or to reduce this problem that we are having. So things like protection, prevention, looking at legal protection, strengthening key laws that exist, amending where necessary, by the way. So as I say, I get the feeling that there is a practical approach to gender, and it is not just this theoretical construct that is there in some policy document. I find that the government is somewhat becoming accountable now where this problem concerned. Again, if a woman is beaten, it's almost necessary that you will see the government responding by way of a press release, acknowledging that they have seen this and, you know, they're looking into it and how they will treat the problem, etc.
Okay. So is there any conversations taking place on a global level in partnership with other countries through the United Nations where the country of Jamaica is taking part?
Well, all right. So based on my knowledge, there is always, so let's say at this moment, Jamaica there is this international program or project that's called the Spotlight Initiative. And there are certain countries that are selected by the United Nations where they will shine the light or bring domestic violence or gender-based violence in the spotlight, as the name denotes. And Jamaica is one of those countries that are under the Spotlight Initiative. So that's just one of the ways that Jamaica at a country level is working with international partners. There are other projects that I'm aware of that the government is working on. So let's say there's this project that's called the Engender Project, and that looks at the relationship between gender and climate change. But there is also the side to it that looks at responding to the gendered needs that have arrived from the COVID-19 situation. And there's a component to it that also gives grants to women who are from at-risk households that based on the needs assessment that have been conducted. There are other, I said, because Jamaica is signatory to several conventions. Again, like now is a period that you would have the meeting CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women that happens in New York every year. But again, because of COVID this year, everything is virtual. Jamaica is actively involved in that because of our commitment to see the Beijing platform. And so we are accountable to these treaties and conventions and our international partners. Again, I spoke to you about the Women's Health Survey just now. The Women's Health Survey was actually a gift by our international partners. And you have, let's say, certain, like the Caribbean Development Bank, and so they would help us with, let's say, capacity building. And so, you know, there are partnerships that are happening, could be a bit more structured, but it is there.
Okay, great. So looking at the diaspora community then, that would be watching this program, what is it that the country then needs on looking at from a granular perspective? How can the diaspora help the community, the country, address these issues? Is it, contributing, identifying communities that they could support independently, creating shelters, helping them to come up with some kind of identification program where people could call in and ask for assistance, and they can identify places or shelters or safe houses within outside communities that they can access and go to? What is it that the diaspora community can do to assist Jamaica in helping address these issues, as far as solutions, looking at solutions to help address these issues?
All right, so I said to you that I work in the space. I will not give my contact details for them to reach out to me, but I will route them to the Bureau of Gender Affairs, which is the lead machinery for gender and the development of gender equality in Jamaica. There are some, particularly the national shelter right now is a big ticket item that I see where that is something that the diaspora can help with, and the diaspora, the country needs help where that is concerned. There is also the idea of speaking with the Bureau of Gender Affairs to hear the hotspot communities where domestic violence is taking place in Jamaica, to work with community groups that exist in areas like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be financial support, It could be that when persons from the diaspora visit home, they come home on vacation, they may have the expertise that, let's say, a community in Falmouth may be in need of. Let's say they are an expert on monitoring and evaluation. Maybe on communicating with the Bureau of Gender Affairs, they would have learned that there's a community close by where they will be on vacation, and that is their charity or their charitable activity for the year. And there's always the idea that they could also reach out to the churches, and that they would have left back home, because churches have always been involved in social good in Jamaica. So you can reach out to your church, and you can also provide the capacity building opportunities to your church too, because we have to move away from this idea of doing charitable activities that have no targets. So they have no desirable outcome. You're feeding the homeless, they're all good activities, but if they don't have any desirable outcomes, then they're not measurable. And if they're not measurable, it means that we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what development outcome does this contribute to. How are we moving the homeless from a state of not having dinner every day to a point where they can just come to you or to your facility for just 2 times out of the week? There is scope for that kind of capacity building with community groups and the churches that take on these charitable activities. And I might add too that Jamaica has a robust program for young teenage mothers, giving them a second chance to be reintegrated into society. And that's also a scope that can be explored for the diaspora to give back to Jamaica, you know, helping teenage mothers to reintegrate themselves into society. And there can also be work that is done by the diaspora in a targeted way. So let's say they do their own fundraising to undertake charitable initiatives, let's say giving meal vouchers, etc. So, you know, there's a scope, there is lots of scope. The number for the Bureau of Gender Affairs is 754-8577. I repeat, 754-8577. So you can contact the Bureau of Gender Affairs to start that discussion.
Lovely. All right, so that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Peart, for joining us and informing us and having this very enlightening conversation about currently what's happening within the country and the work that's being done both by the university from an educational perspective, from a boots on the ground perspective, as well as policy and administration that's taken place. So I look forward to, you know, touching base with you in the future and seeing the progress that's actually taking place within the communities and nationally. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Ms. Staff. It was a pleasure coming on. I guess when you're having fun, time flies.
It flies, exactly. It really does. So I look forward